The signal came back empty. Not broken, not scrambled, just empty, like there was nothing there to find. The technician on duty was a small creature from the Pelari system, a species known for being calm under pressure. But when she ran the scan a second time and got the same result, her 4 hands started shaking. She ran it a third time, a fourth. Then she stood up from her console and walked very quickly down the corridor toward the council's main chamber, her claws clicking against the metal floor in a rhythm that sounded almost like panic. Sector 7G, Sol System, Earth, 14 billion humans, an entire civilization that had been there yesterday, gone. Not destroyed, not burning, not reduced to rubble or dust or radiation. Just gone, as if someone had taken an eraser and wiped it clean from the universe. Counselor Dorath was the first to hear the report. He was a towering insectoid, nearly 3 meters tall, with a hard shell that gleamed like dark copper under the chamber lights. He had held his seat on the Galactic Council for 40 years, and in that time he had learned that most emergencies were not really emergencies at all. They were misunderstandings, equipment failures, or the panicked cries of small minds facing small problems. So when the technician told him that Earth had vanished, he clicked his mandibles in what passed for a laugh among his kind. "Run a diagnostic on your equipment," he said. "Planets do not simply disappear." But the equipment was fine, and Earth was still gone. Within hours, the news spread through the council station like smoke through an open window. 312 species shared this station, and every one of them had an opinion. The Rathari ambassador, a sleek predator with silver scales and cold eyes, leaned back in his chair and smiled when he heard. "Perhaps the universe has corrected itself," he said to his aides, loud enough for others to hear. Humanity was always a mistake. Others were not so sure. The Dranathi delegate, an ancient being who moved slowly and spoke even slower, said nothing at all. He simply closed his eyes and folded his thin hands together. And those who knew him well recognized the gesture. It was the Dranathi expression for mourning. Admiral Yuna heard the news in her quarters. She was human, one of the few still stationed at council headquarters. She had been born on Hanuul, a colony world that orbited a yellow star 200 light-years from Earth. But she had trained at Earth's Naval Academy, walked its mountains, breathed its air, and called it home in the way that soldiers call any place home where they once felt safe. When the message reached her console, then she sat down on the edge of her bed and pressed her hands flat against her knees to stop them from trembling. Her mind moved fast, the way it always did in a crisis. Not destroyed, no debris field, no energy signatures, no distress calls. Earth had not been attacked. Earth had not been broken. Earth had simply stopped being there. That was worse. That was so much worse. She opened a secure channel to Captain Teho, her former commanding officer. He was stationed on Biol, a small colony world near the edge of human-controlled space. Teho was the kind of man who never raised his voice, who solved problems with patience and logic, who had once talked a hostile alien captain into standing down, simply by asking him calm questions, for 2 hours straight. Yuna trusted him more than anyone alive. "Earth is gone," she said when his face appeared on the screen. "Not destroyed, gone, and they left something behind." Teho's expression did not change, but his eyes did. Something shifted behind them, something deep and cold, like water moving beneath ice. "What did they leave?" he asked. "A cube, black, 1 meter across. It is sitting in Earth's orbit, perfectly still. It has no energy output, no signal, no radiation, but when our scanners tried to read it, it sent back one word in every known language at the same time." "What word?" Yuna paused. She could still feel the weight of it in her chest, pressing down like a stone. "Enough." Tejo said nothing for a long time. Then he nodded, once, and began pulling up personnel files on his console. "I am recalling every human ship within range," he said quietly. "Whatever this is, we need our people close." The Council, meanwhile, sent 3 scout ships to Sol Space to investigate. They arrived expecting wreckage, or a weapon, or some sign of what had happened. Instead, they found exactly what the sensors had promised: nothing. The sun still burned. Mars still turned. Jupiter's storms still raged. But where Earth had been, there was only empty space and a small black cube hanging motionless against the stars. The lead scout, a Venari captain with excellent nerves, tried to approach the cube. When his ship came within 500 meters, every instrument on his bridge went dark for exactly 3 seconds. When they came back online, his crew was silent. Several of them were crying, though none of them could explain why. He pulled back and sent his report to the Council. "Do not approach," he wrote. "This object is not a weapon. I do not know what it is, but it made my crew feel something that I have no word for in my language. The closest translation I can offer is this: it made them feel like they had done something terrible, and they could never take it back." Back on the Council station, the debates began. Some called for the cube to be destroyed. Others wanted to study it. The referee wanted to claim Sol Space as open territory. Through it all, Yuna sat in the gallery and watched, and said nothing, and felt the weight of that single word pressing down on her ribs like gravity itself. Enough. She did not yet know what it meant. But she knew, with the certainty that lives in the bones of every human who has ever stood at the edge of something vast and dark, that the galaxy was about to learn a lesson it had spent 200 years avoiding. And she knew it was going to hurt. Dr. Jisoo had spent her entire career buried in history. She worked in the deepest level of the Council archives, a vast underground library carved into the stone beneath the station, where the records of every spacefaring civilization were kept in crystal storage blocks that could survive the death of a star. She was quiet, careful, and thorough. She preferred the company of old data to the company of living people, and she had never once been called upon for anything urgent. Until Yuna contacted her. "I need a full report," Yuna said over the secure channel. Her voice was steady, but Jisoo could hear the tension beneath it, like a wire pulled tight. "Everything we did, everything humanity contributed to this galaxy, every war we ended, every plague we cured, every time we showed up when no one else would. I need it compiled, organized, and ready to present to the Council within 48 hours. That is a lot of history." "Then you should start now." So Jisoo started. She pulled record after record from the crystal blocks, and as she read through them, she felt something growing in her chest, a feeling she had not expected. It was not pride exactly, it was closer to grief. Because the records told a story that the galaxy had apparently forgotten, or chosen to ignore, or never truly understood in the first place. She began with the Ven collapse. 40 years ago, a spatial anomaly had appeared in the Pelori system, a tear in the fabric of space that grew wider every hour, swallowing everything it touched: light, matter, gravity. Nothing escaped it. The system contained 4 inhabited worlds and over 2 billion people. Every species with ships in the region evacuated. The Council held emergency sessions. Diplomats argued about resource allocation. And while they argued, Commander Unji flew her ship into the anomaly. Unji was 34 years old. She had a crew of 11. Their ship was not a warship. It was a retrofitted cargo hauler, because that was the only vessel large enough to carry the gravitational charge that Unji believed could collapse the anomaly from the inside. The math was sound. The survival odds were not. She knew that. Her crew knew that. They went anyway. The charge worked, The anomaly folded in on itself and vanished. The 4 worlds and their 2 billion inhabitants survived. Unji and her 11 crew members did not. The council held a memorial. They called it an extraordinary act of reckless courage. The humans who attended the memorial said nothing. They just lit 12 candles and stood in silence. To them, it was not extraordinary. It was simply what you did when people needed help, and you were the one standing closest. Jisoo moved on to the Korath siege. 25 years ago, the Korath Dominion, a brutal empire built on conquest and fear, had surrounded 3 council worlds and cut off all supply routes. The populations were starving. The council convened to discuss a response. The discussions lasted 6 months. Proposals were drafted, debated, amended, rejected, and redrafted. Meanwhile, children on the besieged worlds were dying of hunger. General Dohan did not wait for the council to finish talking. He sent out a single message on an open channel, not to governments, not to militaries, but to ordinary humans across the galaxy. The message said, "People are starving. I am going. Who is coming with me?" 14,000 volunteers answered. They were not soldiers. They were miners, engineers, teachers, doctors, pilots, ordinary people who owned ships or could crew them. Dowan organized them into a fleet in 3 days, and broke the Korath siege in 9. He lost his left arm in the final battle. When the council demanded to know why he had acted without authorization, he looked at them with an expression that several diplomats later described as terrifying patience, and said, "People were dying. What was there to discuss?" The council censured him. The 3 worlds he saved named holidays after him. Then there were the quiet things, the ones that never made the news feeds. Humanity had cured the Alari plague, a disease that had killed millions across 6 worlds. They developed the cure in a human laboratory, manufactured it in a human facility, and distributed it for free. No trade agreements, no political conditions, no debt. They had reversed the Dranathi genetic decay, a slow unraveling of the Dranathi species DNA that would have driven them to extinction within 10 generations. Human geneticists spent 20 years on the project. When they succeeded, the lead scientist, a woman named Mireille, was asked by a Dranathi reporter why humans had invested so much time and effort into saving a species that was not their own. Mireille had looked confused by the question. "Because we could," she said, as if the answer were so obvious that the question itself made no sense. Jisoo compiled it all. Every rescue, every cure, every time a human being had looked at suffering and decided, without hesitation, to step into it. The report grew longer and heavier with every page, and by the time she finished, her hands were trembling and her eyes were wet. She wrote her conclusion carefully. She was a historian, not a poet, but she understood that some truths needed to be said plainly, or they would not be heard at all. In 200 years of galactic contact, she wrote, humanity never once started a war. They ended 9. They saved worlds that were not theirs. They mourned people who were not their species. They cured diseases that could never infect them. And they never, not once, asked the galaxy to be grateful. They simply expected the galaxy to be kind in return. She paused. Then she added one final line. The galaxy was not kind. She sent the report to Yuna. Then she turned off her console, sat alone in the dark of the archives, and cried. Not because humanity was gone, but because she was only now beginning to understand what that meant. Somewhere in a council chamber full of ambassadors who had spent 2 centuries accepting human generosity while quietly sharpening their knives, the report began to circulate. And for the first time, the silence in the room was not the silence of indifference. It was the silence of shame. Yuna had always believed that the galaxy was complicated but fair. She had grown up on Hanul, a colony world where humans and aliens lived side by side, where trade flowed freely and children of different species played together in parks built under artificial skies. She had joined the Navy not because she wanted to fight, but because she believed in the system, in the idea that 312 civilizations could share a galaxy and make it work. That belief died on a Tuesday afternoon, in a small office deep inside the council archives, when Jisoo showed her the classified files. Jisoo had found them almost by accident. While compiling her report on humanity's contributions, she had come across a series of encrypted records buried in the oldest section of the archives. Records that had been sealed by council authority, and marked with a classification level so high that most species did not even know it existed. Jisoo, as a senior archivist, had the clearance to open them. She wished she had not. The first file was called the Hanul Embargo. For 20 years, the Council had secretly restricted trade to human colony worlds. Supply ships were delayed, import licenses were denied, resource allocations were quietly reduced. The colony worlds never knew it was deliberate. They assumed it was bureaucratic slowness, bad luck, the ordinary friction of a galaxy-sized government. But the internal memos told a different story. The restrictions were intentional, coordinated, and approved at the highest levels of the Council. The reason was written plainly in the documents, without apology or shame. Humanity expands too quickly. Their adaptability is a strategic threat to long-term galactic stability. Growth must be controlled. Yuna read this and felt something shift inside her chest. Not anger, not yet, but a cold and heavy understanding, like watching a door close that she had not known was open. The second file was the Soul Surveillance Program. For 80 years, nearly half of humanity's entire time in the galactic community, the Council had maintained hidden monitoring stations around Earth. They tracked human military development, population growth, cultural evolution, scientific progress, and even individual communication patterns. The program employed thousands of operatives across dozens of species. Its annual budget was larger than the defense spending of most member worlds. Humanity was the only species subjected to this, not the Korath, who had actually invaded Council worlds, not the Rathari, who had openly threatened war on 3 separate occasions. Only the humans, the ones who had never started a fight, who had cured plagues and broken sieges and flown into anomalies to save strangers. The third file was the Rathari proposal. 12 years ago, the Rathari ambassador had stood before the full council and formally proposed a preemptive military campaign against humanity. His argument was simple. Humans were too strong, too fast, too adaptable. If they were not contained now, they would eventually dominate the galaxy, not through conquest, but through sheer competence, which the Rathari considered even more dangerous. The vote failed, but only by 4. Out of 312 civilizations, 154 voted to go to war with a species that had never attacked anyone. 154 species looked at humanity's record of kindness and sacrifice and said, yes, they should be stopped. Yuna stared at that number for a long time. 154. She thought about Unji, who had died to save 2 billion strangers. She thought about Dowan, who had lost his arm breaking a siege that the council could not be bothered to address. She thought about Mireille, who had spent her life healing people who were not her own. 154. Then Jisoo showed her the last file, the worst one, the one that made the others look like misunderstandings. Project Stillwater. It was a council-funded research initiative, conducted in secret over a period of 15 years with one purpose: to develop a biological agent specifically tailored to human physiology. A weapon designed to kill humans and only humans. Something that could be introduced into a water supply, an atmosphere, a ventilation system, and would spread silently, invisibly, unstoppably through any human population it touched. The agent was synthesized, tested on human tissue samples obtained without consent, and stored in a sealed vault on a council station. It was never deployed, but it was ready. It sat in that vault like a loaded gun pointed at 14 billion heads, waiting for someone to decide that the time had come to pull the trigger. Yuna closed the file. She did not slam it shut. She did not throw anything. She did not scream. She simply closed it, placed her hands flat on the table, and sat in silence for a very long time. Taeho was watching her through the console. He had read the files too. His face was still, but his jaw was tight, and his eyes were dark. "They were afraid of us," Yuna said finally. Her voice was quiet, not broken, not angry, just quiet, like someone stating a fact about the weather. "Everything we did for them, every life we saved, every war we ended, every plague we cured, it just made them more afraid." Taeho said nothing for a moment, then very softly, "And now we are gone, and they still do not understand what they lost." That night, the black cube in Earth's orbit activated again. It was brief, less than 3 seconds. But in those 3 seconds, every ship in Sol space received something. Not a word this time, not data, not a signal that could be recorded or analyzed or translated. A feeling. It passed through hulls and shields and walls as if they were not there. It settled into the minds of every living being within range. Venari, Pelari, Dranathi, Rithari. And it sat there like a weight on the soul. It was not anger. It was not hatred. It was not a threat, or a warning, or a declaration of war. It was disappointment. Pure and vast and heavy. Like the disappointment of a parent who has given everything to a child and watched that child choose cruelty anyway. It carried no words, but its meaning was unmistakable. We expected better of you. We believed in you, and you let us down. Several crew members across multiple ships collapsed. Some wept. Others sat frozen, unable to move or speak. A Rithari officer locked himself in his quarters and did not come out for 2 days. And in the council chamber, far from Sol space, Counselor Dorath felt a faint echo of the feeling reach him through the network. Diluted, second-hand, barely a whisper of what the crews had experienced. It was enough. He sat down heavily in his chair, and for the first time in 40 years, wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. The answer, of course, was yes. It started slowly, the way all collapses do. A crack here, a gap there. Small problems that should have been easy to fix, except the people who used to fix them were gone. The Ilari plague came back first. It had been dormant for 30 years, held in check by a treatment that humanity had developed, manufactured, and distributed across 6 worlds at no cost. The production facility was on Earth. The research data was on Earth. The scientists who understood the molecular structure of the cure, most of them were on Earth, and Earth was gone. The first cases appeared on Ilari Prime within 2 weeks of Earth's disappearance. Children mostly. The disease attacked their respiratory systems, filling their lungs with fluid until they could not breathe. The Ilari government sent urgent messages to the council, begging for help, for medicine, for anyone who knew how to make the cure. The council formed a committee. They scheduled a meeting to discuss resource allocation. The meeting was postponed twice due to scheduling conflicts. While they rescheduled, the death toll on Ilari Prime reached 10,000. Then the Korath came back. The Korath Dominion had been quiet for 20 years, not because they had changed, but because human patrol fleets along the frontier made the cost of raiding too high to be worth the effort. Those patrols were gone now. The ships that had run them were crewed by humans from Earth, and they had vanished along with everything else. The Korath tested the frontier with a single raiding party. When no response came within 48 hours, they sent 20 more. Within a month, 2 colony worlds on the outer rim had fallen. The Council dispatched a peacekeeping fleet, but it was small and slow, assembled from species that had never needed to fight because humans had always done the fighting for them. The fleet arrived 3 weeks late to a colony that had already been stripped of its resources and its people. The Drenathi were next. Their genetic stabilization program, the one that human scientists had spent 20 years perfecting, required constant monitoring and adjustment. Without the human geneticists who managed it, the program began to drift. Small errors compounded. Within 3 months, the Drenathi Genetic Council issued a quiet, devastating report. Without intervention, their species would face terminal genetic decay within 5 generations. They were not dying today, they were simply beginning to end. And then the trade routes collapsed. No one had realized, or perhaps no one had wanted to realize, how much of the galaxy's commerce moved on human ships. 23% of all interstellar trade. Human merchant fleets carried food, medicine, raw materials, and manufactured goods between worlds that had no other reliable connection to each other. Without those fleets, supply chains fractured like glass dropped on stone. Worlds that imported their food began to ration. Worlds that exported fuel had no one to sell to. Prices rose, shortages spread. On a dozen stations and colony worlds, fights broke out over resources that had been abundant just months before. Counselor Doroth watched the crisis reports accumulate on his desk. Each one was worse than the last. Each one pointed to the same root cause, a gap where humanity used to be. He had spent 40 years believing that the galaxy was a machine, and that every part could be replaced. Now he understood, with a clarity that felt like a blade between his ribs, that some parts were not parts at all. They were the foundation. And when you pulled out the foundation, everything above it fell. The Rathari ambassador did not live to see the worst of it. 3 months after Earth's disappearance, he was killed by one of his own people, a Rathari citizen whose young daughter had died of the Alari plague on a trade station far from home. The plague that humans had cured for free. The cure that no longer existed because the people who made it had been driven away by fear and ingratitude. The assassin was arrested. At his trial, he said only one thing. He celebrated. My daughter is dead, and he celebrated. Yuna watched all of this from the council station. She had been offered a seat on the council, a desperate, transparent gesture, as if giving one human a chair could replace 14 billion. She declined. She had no interest in sitting among the people who had spent 80 years spying on her species and building weapons to kill them. Instead, she and Teho did something else. They sent out a call, not to the council, not to governments, but to every human still alive in the galaxy. There were approximately 200,000 of them, scattered across colony worlds, research stations, merchant ships, and military outposts. 200,000, where there had once been 14 billion. Yuna addressed them in a broadcast that reached every corner of known space. She stood in a small room on the council station, wearing her Navy uniform, her hands steady and her voice clear. Earth chose to leave, she said. We were not part of that choice. But we are still here, and we have a decision to make. The galaxy that feared us, spied on us, voted to attack us, and built weapons to destroy us. That galaxy is now falling apart without us. Do we help them? Do we keep saving people who were planning to kill us? Or do we finally let them face the silence they created? The vote took 3 days. It was not unanimous. Some were heartbroken. Some wanted nothing more than to find a quiet corner of the galaxy and disappear, the way Earth had. But the majority spoke, and what they said was the most human thing possible. They chose to help. A young medic named Suhyun was among the first to volunteer. She was 26 years old, born on Hanul, trained in xenobiology. She had never been to Earth, but she carried its values the way all humans did, not as a memory, but as an instinct. She shipped out to Alari Prime with a team of 40, carrying partial records of the plague cure, and a determination to reconstruct it from whatever fragments they could find. When a reporter asked her why she was going, she paused. Then she smiled, a small, tired, honest smile, and said, "Because we can." 200,000 humans, holding together a galaxy of 312 species. Not because the galaxy deserved it, not because anyone asked, but because that is what humans do. They show up, they help, and they do not stop, even when every rational reason to stop is staring them in the face. The galaxy did not deserve them, but it needed them, and for now, that was enough. 6 months had passed since Earth vanished, and the galaxy looked like a house with half its walls missing, still standing, but barely, and only because a handful of people were holding up the beams with their bare hands. Sihun and her team had managed to recreate a partial version of the Alari plank cure. It was not as effective as the original. It saved 7 out of 10 instead of 10 out of 10. But it was enough to slow the dying. The Alari wept when the first shipments arrived. They had sent thousands of messages to the council begging for help. The help that came was carried by 40 humans on a single ship. The Korath advance had been stopped. Not defeated, just stopped, by a coalition of human captains who organized the scattered remnants of frontier defense into something that resembled a fighting force. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they held the line through cleverness and stubbornness and the kind of desperate courage that only comes from knowing there is no one behind you. The Drenathai genetic program had been stabilized, temporarily, by a team of human scientists working from incomplete records and educated guesses. It was not a permanent fix, but it bought time, a generation, maybe 2, and sometimes that is all you can ask for. 200,000 humans doing the work of 14 billion. They were exhausted. They were stretched thin across a galaxy that had tried to destroy them, and they kept going, because stopping was not something they knew how to do. Yuna watched all of it, and she was proud, and she was tired, and she carried a question inside her that would not let her rest. The black cube still floated in Earth's orbit, silent and patient. The council had forbidden anyone from approaching it, but the council was busy now, busy dealing with the consequences of its own cruelty, and Yuna had never been very good at following orders that did not make sense. She took a small ship. She told Teho where she was going. He looked at her for a long time, and then he nodded. "Come back," he said. That was all. The journey to Sol Space took 4 days. She spent most of it alone with her thoughts, staring out at the stars and wondering what she would find. She was not afraid. She had passed through fear months ago and come out the other side into something quieter. A kind of steady resolve that sits in the bones and does not move. She arrived in Earth's orbit on a clear, silent morning. Though of course there are no mornings in space, only the cold light of distant stars. The sun burned to her left, huge and golden. Mars hung in the distance like a rust-colored marble. And there, exactly where Earth should have been, the black cube waited. It was small. That was the thing that always struck people. How small it was. 1 meter across, perfectly smooth, perfectly black. It reflected nothing. It emitted nothing. It simply existed with the quiet patience of something that had all the time in the universe. Yuna brought her ship to within 100 meters and stopped. She sat in the cockpit, her hands on the controls, her heart beating slow and steady. Then she opened the airlock, crossed the distance in a pressure suit, and reached out her hand. She touched the cube. The universe folded. She was standing in a vast white space, not a room, because it had no walls, and not empty, because it was filled with a light that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was warm. It felt like standing in sunlight on a spring afternoon. And for a moment, Yuna felt tears prick her eyes, because it felt like Earth. There was a man standing in front of her. He was old, not frail but weathered, like wood that has been shaped by decades of wind and rain. His hair was white, his eyes were dark and kind, and infinitely sad. He wore a simple gray suit, and he stood with his hands clasped in front of him, the way someone stands when they have been waiting a long time, and are prepared to wait longer. She knew his face. Everyone did. Elder Hajun, the last chairman of Earth's unified government. The man who had led 14 billion people through 2 centuries of galactic civilization, who had shaken hands with alien diplomats, signed treaties, opened trade routes, and smiled at beings who were secretly planning his species' destruction. He was not real. She understood that. He was a projection, a recording, a message left behind for whoever came looking. But his eyes moved like real eyes, and his voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of real grief. "Yuna," he said, "I hoped it would be you." Her throat was tight. She waited. "We knew," Hajun said, "about the surveillance, about the embargo, about the Rethari vote, about Stillwater. We knew for a long time, longer than you might think, and we kept helping anyway. We kept curing their plagues, and fighting their wars, and feeding their hungry, and carrying their wounded, because we believed the galaxy could be better than its fears." He paused. The sadness in his eyes deepened. "But there is a limit, Yuna. Not to our patience, not to our kindness, to our willingness to exist as a target for people we loved. We watched them build a weapon designed to kill every one of us. We watched them vote on whether to use it. And we realized that if we stayed, one day that vote would pass, and then we would have to fight back." His voice dropped, almost to a whisper. "You know what happens when humans fight back." That was the truth at the center of everything. The truth that the Council had always sensed, but never had the courage to face directly. Humanity was not dangerous because of its ships or its weapons or its technology. Humanity was dangerous because of its will. Because when humans decided to fight, they did not stop. They did not negotiate. They did not calculate acceptable losses. They simply kept going, with a relentless, grinding, unstoppable determination that had no equivalent in any other species. The Council had seen what humans did when they chose to help. They could not bear to imagine what humans would do if they chose to hurt. Earth did not vanish in anger, Hajun continued. Earth vanished in grief. We folded ourselves out of this dimension, took our world, our people, our history, and stepped sideways into a place the Council cannot reach. Not as punishment, as protection. Because the alternative was a war that would have burned the galaxy to ash. He looked at her, and his expression softened. We left the cube as a choice. If the galaxy proves it can be what we always believed it could be, kind, fair, brave, then the cube will open a door, and we will come home. But they have to earn it, not with grand gestures or treaties or apologies, with the small things, by curing plagues for free, by showing up when it is hard, by choosing mercy when no one is watching. He smiled, a small, tired, beautiful smile. We learned it from ourselves, Yuna. Now they have to learn it too. The light faded. Hajun faded. The white space folded back into the cold dark of normal space, and Yuna was floating alone beside the cube. Her hands still pressed against its surface, her cheeks wet with tears. She did not remember crying. She flew back to the Council station. She let the stars pass by in silence, and she thought about everything she had heard, and she let the weight of it settle into her bones. When she arrived, the Council chamber was full. Every ambassador, every delegate, every representative of every species was there. Word had spread that Yuna had touched the cube, and they wanted to know what she had found. The room was silent in a way that rooms are only silent when everyone in them is afraid. Yuna walked to the podium. She stood there for a moment, looking out at 312 species. The species that had spied on her people, built weapons against them, and voted to destroy them, and who were now starving and dying and falling apart because the people they had feared were the only ones holding their world together. She placed her hand flat on the podium. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "They are not gone," she said. "And for the first time in your history, the question is not whether humanity is worthy of this galaxy." She paused. The silence was absolute. "It is whether this galaxy is worthy of humanity." She stepped back from the podium. She walked out of the chamber. The doors closed behind her with a soft, final sound. No one followed her. No one spoke. The chamber stayed silent for a very long time. The kind of silence that fills a room when every person in it is looking at themselves and not liking what they see. Outside, in the cold and endless dark, the black cube waited. Patient, quiet, full of a door that might one day open. If they earned it. If they learned. If they became what humanity had always believed they could be.